Hi, my name is Recky, and welcome to the second episode of Share Your Story. Share Your Story is all about men and women sharing the story with us, no matter if you were a combat medic or a cook on a ship, active or veteran. We want to hear about it. Check the description for more information on how to apply. My second guest is an American, and we are all about to hear his story. His name is David. David, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you for joining the podcast.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here.
Okay, so we want to start, as per usual, we start from the beginning. So, and you're American. The first guest we had, he was conscripted. I mean, he was drafted. But that is a very different thing in the United States. Did you volunteer or did you get drafted?
Kind of both. Let me tell you what it was about.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm about to turn 75 years old. So this story goes back a long time to the Vietnam era period.
I love it. Yeah.
I was in college, and at the time, if you're in college, you get a deferment for going into the military. But at that time, unlike today, we very much did have a draft.
Okay.
When I got ready to finish college, they, at the beginning of this year, or that year, I should say, like every year, they did the draft lottery period.
Lottery.
They had numbers from 1 to 365 for every birthday of the year.
Okay. That sounds weird.
Yeah, what it essentially means is if you got a low draft number,
Yeah.
you were almost certain to get drafted.
Okay.
And if you had a high draft number, you were probably not going to get drafted.
So that's actually a lottery.
Me,
that's actually a lottery. So how do you get did you get it per mail or did you get it like, how do you find out which number you
yes.
had?
Yeah, well, they announce it first, but then they also notify the people that were, when they actually do get drafted.
Okay.
And unfortunately for me, my draft number was 15.
Oh, that's really low, right?
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that made it virtually certain that I was going to get drafted. I did not want to go into the Army. So I volunteered instead for the Air Force, period. And I did that 6 months before I would have to report.
Oh, I hear
And
ya.
by the way it works, I actually got my draft notification or my report date notification 1 day after
Oh my God.
I went actually active to the Air Force. If I had been 1 day later, I would have been forced to go to the Army, even though I had already been accepted into the Air Force.
That is insane. You can actually do that. That's like a trap door you just took, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, but that's allowed to do that. You can volunteer.
Mm-hmm. Well, then,
Yeah.
Period. We don't have a draft now, of course.
Yeah, of course.
So my entry date into the Air Force was actually April 1st of 1970. And immediately after that, I went to basic training like everybody else. Period. Well, I got to stop saying period.
You can say whatever you want. I'm all ears. I'm all ears.
Okay. Basic training was much like basic training in any of the services. It focused on basic military training and fitness. But part of what you do at the time is also to take certain tests. Well, one of the tests they offered was a language aptitude test. They told us at the time that if we did well on that test, we could be entered into one of the language schools that were going to be available. At the time, the languages available were Arabic, Chinese, and Russian.
Okay.
So I thought all three of those, or any of those three, would be translatable into work when I got out of service.
Yeah.
So I volunteered. I took the test. I did very, very well on it. And then I get my notification that my selected was to Vietnamese language, North Vietnamese dialect, period.
Wow.
Needless to say, I asked questions.
Yeah.
Well, I found out that I had been unlucky enough, along with one other person. They had not lied to us, but two people in the prior classes failed their security clearance, and we just happened to be the next two up. And instead of getting one of the languages they told us we could get, we got the Vietnamese language.
I know what this means. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So at that point, we went to the Defense Language Institute in El Paso, Texas, and we stayed for a whole year learning language, the Vietnamese language, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day.
Oh my! So this might be a very stupid question, but are you fluent in Vietnamese today?
It's not a stupid question, but it's been over 50 years.
Yeah.
So no, I am not. I have a few phrases that I can still say and a few basics like that.
That makes sense.
For the most part, I don't remember it at all because it's not like I had an opportunity to use it later on.
No, I understand that. So that was a kind of a stupid question. Was it 50 years?
No,
50.
50 plus years, yeah, because I went in 1970, so it's been 52 years.
Oh, Lord. Time flies, right?
Yeah. So right after that school finished, they sent us to San Angelo, Texas for radio training. That was just a 3-month process. During that process, we got our assignments, and I was assigned to what they called NKP, Thailand. Has a long name, but they abbreviated it as NKP. Well, NKP Thailand is actually on the border of Thailand and I want to say Laos, but I'm not positive. Okay. But it's right on the Mekong River, literally on the Mekong River, period. Yeah. So I wasn't very happy about that because my whole goal about volunteering for the Air Force was to try not to have to carry a gun. So I went to talk with my commander, and he said essentially that the only alternative that was available to us was to seek, I was married, was to seek a hardship discharge. He also went on to say that that would not work, but that it might get me what I was trying for.
I don't understand the hardship. What is that?
I said to apply for a hardship discharge.
What is that then?
If you qualify, it's based on your needs that can vary. It could be, in this case, it was going to be based on the fact that I was married and that I had a less than 5-month-old son at the time. And
okay. So it's a family matter.
It was a family matter, or we proceeded with it as a family matter.
Okay.
I had to meet with military counselors. I had to meet with my commanding officer. I had to meet with a minister and several other things we had to do as part of that process. Well, as he had said would be the case, they came back and denied the hardship discharge. But at the same moment that they denied that discharge, they said, but we have been able to have you reassigned.
Oh.
And so my ultimate place of service was at Chulinko Air Station in Taipei, Taiwan.
Okay.
That air station is located on the top of a mountain. Oh. And essentially, our job was to monitor all of the radio voice communications from North Vietnam that we could possibly pick up. Much of that was in code. So we would be writing down the codes, numeric codes, 3-digit codes, 4-digit codes, and 5-digit codes. But some of it was in the actual language.
Okay.
It was all highly classified, what we were doing. My actual job title was linguist interrogator.
Oh wow, that's an awesome
Fortunately for me,
title.
I never had to interrogate anybody.
Yeah.
Uh, but I did spend, all of my shifts on listening to those broadcasts and codes. The coded messages were sent on to the National Security Agency, usually abbreviated as NSA, between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. The language, the actual language communications were translated and then, under most circumstances, similarly submitted to the NSA. However, a few messages were so critical that they got high priority.
Wow. So
I actually did get a couple of those.
like,
And
like
the most significant one, which I used to not be able to mention, but it's okay now because it's been declassified,
okay, and I'm super interested
is
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
is that I intercepted a message where they said that they had shot down a B-52 and captured the pilot alive.
Whoa.
That particular message was reviewed quickly to make sure that it wasn't a practice exercise, and it was determined that it was not a practice exercise. And that message was on the president's desk less than 5 minutes after I intercepted it.
Oh my, that's amazing. I got
Isn't that
goosebumps.
amazing?
I got goosebumps, man. I got goosebumps. Oh my God, I love that.
And that happened twice more, I think, during the time I was there. I was only in Taiwan for about a year because the year that I was there was 73, late 73 and early 74, which is when they began the withdrawal and we finally started to get out of Vietnam.
Yeah.
So I got an early mission change or location change.
Yeah.
And even that became very interesting because I was lucky enough to get assigned to the National Security Agency.
Oh.
So I went to the East Coast, and for the last 2 years of my service, I spent that at the National Security Agency, reporting to a civilian boss rather than a military boss, which made that kind of interesting. But
Yeah.
my work essentially was the same, except that now I was taking the messages that other people had passed on to National Security Agency and translating them into English,
Oh.
or using the code words that they had developed, or they had broken the codes, and then writing in the English of what that code was saying.
But what kind of a messages was it domestically, or you still were international and it was still in Vietnamese? Was it still the same enemy you were monitoring, or what was it?
Yes,
Okay.
because this, bear in mind, I would have been sent there in 1972, and it wasn't until 1974 that I got out, and a lot of people got out because the war was ending.
Yeah.
So for those 2 years, the war was still going on very dramatically, and all of the messages that I was either translating or using their help by having the code words and still translating that into English print. Okay.
Yeah.
But these were all messages captured by other people who were out in the field capturing them. So the ones that would be reached, or that would reach the level of having to get to the president's desk immediately, would have already been handled. So these were much more routine messages, but they were messages, about the supplies that the North Vietnamese had available to them, the routes that they were using to transport those things, the amount of troops they might have had available, the weaponry they might have had available, their plans of who they might want to attack next,
Yeah.
all of those kinds of things that needed to be tracked in order to be able to respond most appropriately to what was going on in the war.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
And yet at the end of every day, I went from National Security Agency to my modest apartment in Baltimore, like any other civilian, and looked like I was a civilian. It was rather strange. In fact, out of the 4 years that I spent in the Air Force, other than the year, no, not even, I can't even count the language year, which I'll explain in a minute. I only spent the 6 weeks of basic training and the 3 months of radio school at an Air Force base. Otherwise, the language training all took place at Fort Bliss in Texas, which is an Army facility.
Yeah.
And when I was in Taiwan, yes, the air station was Air Force, but bear in mind, the air station was really little more than a couple of barracks and administration buildings and the radio listening facility at the top of a mountain. So it took me almost an hour to get from the house I was living in a suburb of Taipei, to get up to where that station was. But everything else, including the commissary and housing and all the other things that you might need to have contact with, was Navy. Yeah. So during that year, I was essentially in a Navy organization. And then when I moved to National Security Agency, of course, now I'm even reporting to a civilian. So I'm not at an air base or an air station at all, even then.
Was this like a civilian building you went to as well, like NSA building? I don't know if
I know the National Security Agency is an enormous building.
Yeah.
Highly secure because it is dealing with classified information and whatnot. I don't know how many people worked there, but it would have been in the low thousands, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was quite a few.
Yeah.
I also forgot sort of an important detail. When I was in the language school,
yep,
somewhere along the line, we also got information about, not where we're going to be assigned, but what the possibilities were. And for part of that was whether or not you qualified to be in flight status, what they called flight status.
Okay.
Because the most direct number of people were qualified for flight status, and they actually did their monitoring of communications from planes that took off from NKP Thailand and other places, so that they could literally be flying over the jungle or the city or whatever it was where they were, and they could pick up conversations that would be less capable of going the distances it took, for example, to get from North Vietnam to Taipei.
Yeah.
So we were monitoring the more high intensity radio, but the people in the flight status were able to be and needed to be right on site, more or less, in order to be able to pick up what they were listening for. Besides the language people, the linguists, there were also people that were called ditty bops. And ditty bops were people that took essentially Morse code and other similarly transmitted codes that were not of a voice nature.
Yeah.
And they were involved as well. So as part of that process, I found out I was not eligible for flight status because my vision wasn't good enough. And by good enough, you had to be, at that time, you literally had to have be
A
able to
hawk.
have,
Yeah.
perfect vision without your glasses.
Yeah.
Or if you had glasses, I don't know what, they would have to be really low powered because my eyesight wasn't that bad, but I still didn't qualify for flight status. So that's when they needed to decide where they were going to assign me, and that's when I got the original assignment to NKP Thailand, which was a ground assignment. But shortly thereafter, when I got not approved, but a modified form of the hardship discharge, meaning the reassignment to a different location that wasn't having to require you to have a gun.
Yeah. So you didn't want to bear any arms. Is that the
That's correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. That was my goal. I wanted to serve my country, but I didn't really want to carry a gun. I'd never shot a gun. I'd never held a gun. Wasn't interested in it, et cetera, et cetera. But what I did find very, very interesting was that when I actually got to Shilinko Air Station, and reported to work for the first time, I discovered that virtually every single person that came in with me, which was about a dozen of us, were taking over for people who were leaving and going somewhere else, and we were coming in. All of us had some sort of a similar story about how they got there.
I can only imagine.
Exactly. So we called ourselves the oddballs because we were the people that got to Shilinko Air Station, yet there's something weird about how it was that they got there. And they weren't all the same, but they were something weird about how we all got there. Oh, and virtually every single one of us was a college graduate as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Because at the time, you had the student deferment. But as soon as you got out, if you had a low number, you were going to get drafted, and they didn't give a crap. They didn't need more officers. So the odds of you actually going in as an officer or going to officer school first were next to zero. So there was just tons and tons of college graduates active in the service at that time that they were still, low-level airmen or airman first class or
it was too many.
Maybe the lowest level of sergeant. So I mean that, and I spent that 4 years, and then because the war was ending, I actually got out of service 6 months early, and was discharged in April of 1974, where I hadn't started until September of 1970.
Okay. What was the main? What was it that you learned that you still have today? Is there anything that you can take from this time, from your time over there, to something that you have today, like something you learned?
Well, if it had been a language that is used internationally, then the answer to that would clearly be yes. So all of the people that got Chinese or Russian or Arabic, or I don't even know what all the other ones were that they took.
Yeah, I understand that.
They trained people. I know there was others. There were some Eastern European languages. There was, I think Turkish was one that they offered. I'm not positive on that. But all of those people probably took that into civilian service. And that had been my intent to do as well when I volunteered.
Yeah, I understand that.
But then when I got Vietnamese, that essentially went away. That wasn't going to be an option to be able to do that. So somewhere along the line, I actually was trying to make a decision to go to officers school because I didn't see any good choice for using the information I'd gained in the civilian environment. And I'd gotten all the approvals that I needed for that and was just ready to actually put the application in for approval when we got the notice that we were being discharged early because of the end of the war.
Did you have an opportunity to continue, or was that the end of your service at that point?
No, there was no opportunity to reenlist. I shouldn't say there was no opportunity because, first of all, that the decision about going to officers school happened when I was in Shlinko Air Station, so that was 2 years before I got out of service. But the opportunity to do that went away because I got the assignment to NSA. I kind of misspoke
Yeah.
before. Okay, so I got the assignment to NSA, which is exactly what I wanted. I don't mean that I wanted that assignment, but that was a states-based assignment
Yeah.
with no requirement to carry a gun. So I was delighted with that. So I then didn't put in the officer application, and that was kind of lucky in a way because what made that decision about whether or not to apply for officers school difficult was that the only officer available at the time was what they called a launch control officer, which would have meant that I would have been in a missile silo, somewhere in the upper Midwest and been one of the people that would have had to launch, an ICBM
Yeah.
atomic loaded thing if that had actually happened. Um, but I thought that was preferable than not trying to be an officer at all at that time until I found out I was going to NSA. So then I stopped that.
Okay, so
And then
you had the
mhm,
opportunity to go ahead and continue in the military, but you had an awesome opportunity to join the NSA. So you picked that.
correct, sort of. Okay,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
what it was, it wasn't an opportunity to stay in the Air Force at that point. I had a 4-year commitment
yeah.
because the difference between Army and our Air Force was, or any other, uh, Navy or Marines or whatever, is if you volunteered, that was a 4-year commitment.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were drafted, it was only a 2-year requirement.
Okay.
So I knew I was going to be in for 2 more years. I was just happy with where I end up getting assigned. Then how, but that still impacted me eventually because just before we found out that um, we were going to get early discharge, I was in the middle of the process of applying for a civilian position at NSA as well, which would have been utilizing everything that I'd learned uh, and worked out very well. And it was a pretty well graded job as well. And it would have got me in civilian service, which could have led to lots of other things. You never know.
Yeah.
Um, and I had completed almost all of that entire process as well. But that was when Nixon, who was president at the time, before he wasn't going to last the whole year, but he lasted long enough to impact me. He put a federal hiring freeze in place. So boom, all of a sudden I had no chance of getting a job, and I'm having to reevaluate completely what I was going to do when I got out of the Army or out of the Air Force.
So what did you do after you got discharged?
Well, I took a few temporary jobs because the economy was bad back then and the hiring was not good. But we loved the Baltimore area. I was trying to find something that I could enjoy and would still allow me to survive financially. Um, but I really didn't find that. But eventually I found one that I thought I could make work where I was working for a agent or a general agent, I should say, which means that he had his own office um, for Mutual of Omaha Insurance Company, which a lot of people have heard of.
Okay. Yeah. Probably.
But
I'm
if you're
not.
working for the general agent, you're not actually working for Mutual of Omaha. You're working for the general agent.
Okay.
Well, he announced I did that for a total, not between several other jobs on that job, for for a total of like almost 9 years.
Oh,
And then he announced that he was retiring and that they were going to be selling the agency to Mutual of Omaha. We had no guaranteed opportunity of a position with Mutual of Omaha because he was retiring and we didn't work for Mutual of Omaha. But the best they would offer us was, if we wanted to, a chance to interview for a position. At any rate, I interviewed for a position. I got a position at Mutual of Omaha, moved to Omaha, Nebraska, and then my career I ended up being Mutual of Omaha's corporate records manager. So
that's insane. David, I am
yeah,
super happy that you decided to apply it. This was an amazing story, and it was so much happened, so much that was planned. That didn't
exactly.
happen. You wanted to do this, but this happened. Yeah, it's a
Right.
fantastic story, and it's your life, David. I am
Yeah.
super happy. Thank you so much for joining. We're gonna wrap it up here, and we had a bunch of fun. I hope you
Okay.
guys that listen had fun too. Uh,
I did, and I hope they did.
yeah, I'm very sure of it. So thank you for listening. Stay tuned for episode number 3. Thank you. Have a good time.